All right, welcome to our final chapter for this course, and this is chapter 20, where we're going to focus on kind of going through an overview of environmental policy and decision making. The outline for this chapter is going to be as follows. So first we're going to talk about new challenges for a new century. We're going to look at the development of environmental policy in the U.S. We're going to talk about environmental policy and regulation. We're going to look at how policy has started to lean towards the greening factor in looking at environmental policy. We're going to look at international environmental policy, and then we're going to talk about how it really all comes back to our individual decisions and kind of what we do in terms of how we live our lives, how we run our businesses, and our decisions will have an impact in or on the environment and future generations. And so to start off with, looking at new challenges for a new century. As we have talked about all throughout this course, there's large change that's been implemented by humans on the environments, and not only are we changing the environments, but our populations are growing rapidly as well. And so this rapid change forces differences in conditions in all of our environments, and then that ultimately affects human life. Population growth is very rapid. You know, we're going to deal with a much larger global population in the future. And that population is going to double faster and faster as it gets larger and larger. And with a growing population, we need more food, we need more resources, more services, more space. And space isn't infinite. You know, we do have a limitation on that. So same as resources. Larger populations will aggravate scarcity. And so what we mean by this is that if you have resources that are scarce, a growing population is not going to help that situation. It's going to aggravate it. It's going to cause more issues. And those resources are going to become even more scarce. Increase for land and natural resources adds to that conflict. And with these growing populations, we may continue to overharvest, overfish, and overgraze our ecosystems because all populations need those resources. And if we're not responsible in terms of regulating how we take those resources, we could lead or get into very big issues. And so like we said, population increase aggravates resource scarcity. So look at all those people that's, trying to get water from this well. We have an instance of overfishing here on the left-hand side where that catch really isn't a lot there. And so again, growing population is going to be cause for a big concern. We also have globalization to take into consideration. So international trade, international connections. People are moving across borders. We have relationships between international governments that are changing and fluid and dynamic. And so all of that's going to change in the future as well. We're in what's known as a communication revolution. So our technology has moved to a way to where we can receive information at unprecedented speeds. We can influence events that affect how we receive that information. Our civil society is imparting a greater role in governmental decisions, and we're looking for solutions that are outside of our government's power. And so really kind of trending towards new dynamics in terms of how the civil society affects every other part of the politics and resource use. We are also in what's known as a knowledge economy. So knowledge has become the economy's most important resource. And really what this means, so if you have an understanding of the interconnectedness of um, how you're affecting environmental um, resources, how that affects your profits, how that affects how you have to run your industry or your facility based off of waste management, based off of pollution prevention. Um, and so by understanding that and having the knowledge to understand those dynamics, it really changes how your finances are and how the economy is going to work. Because, for example, a knowledge-driven economy really has helped launch a trend in profitable pollution prevention, because we know that by preventing pollution, it's much more cost efficient than having to clean it up. And so a lot of us now understand that by that pollution really equals inefficiency and increased costs. And so not only do we want to stay away from pollution environmentally, but also economically. Um, and so again, it's important to really recognize the interrelationship between economics, between social goals, between environments and environmental health. And so really what that comes down to is that governments need to use their power to facilitate, um, you know, and move from prescribing behavior that runs against those interrelationships to generating behavior that is supporting those relationships and facilitating those dynamics. So maintaining a good economic foundation while keeping environments healthy and keeping society running and having good societal goals. Businesses need to also have that dialogue with communities and citizens, and not just kind of do what's quote unquote best for them in terms of economics, because that's may not be what's best for them in the long run, especially if we look back on our discussions with pollution and how the cost of paying for that pollution cleanup, etc. And so the good thing is that trend is not destiny. So what we've done in the past does not mean that's what's going to happen in the future, right? And so we can make those changes. We can come back from that. And so we can learn from our past. And so for the past century, quarter century, the basic pattern of environmental protection has been to react to crisis. We focused primarily on past and present problems and really didn't anticipate problems, and didn't plan for problems and try to prevent those problems from happening. So what we really have to do is we have to think about the future, and accelerate the rate of how we think about the present and the future and how we make that connection, because environmental effects of changes in, say, the global economic activity are not just local, they are global. You can feel those changes in nations around the world and individuals in the local area. And so we want to minimize environmental and financial debt so that our future generations will not be, will not have the weight of kind of carrying that in the future. And the most important remaining sources of pollution are diffuse and widespread. And so they're, again, interconnected, crossing boundaries. And so we know that controlling pollutants alone will not achieve a sustainable economy. We have to work at all of those interconnections that exist within the sector of environmental science that we've been talking about, law, policy, social aspects, economic aspects, environmental aspects. And so, just fixing pollution is not going to fix the issue. We have to look at all of the interconnected branches of this problem in order to be successful. We're progressing from an environmental paradigm that's based up on cleanup and control, to one where we're trying to prevent that from happening. So we're really looking at assessing what could happen, anticipating what could happen, and trying to avoid crises that will lead to environmental degradation or public health. And so in the future, environmental quality is really a function of our behavior. And so how we determine to run our lives, run our businesses, is really going to determine how the environments function in the future. And so we need to have that environmental awareness, because that's going to really be putting towards the quality of the environments in the future. And we need to have an involved public. We need to get the communities involved. We need to educate them on these connections and how over-consuming resources is a big deal, tragedy of the commons issues, and a lot of the other things that we've talked about throughout this course. In the next 50 years, we'll see a world in where we're more crowded, living closer together, consuming more resources, more connected than what we've ever been before. And so having a good public understanding will only help that situation. And so we really need to try to get that down if we want to be successful in the future. And we've talked about population in past chapters, and so the U.S. population is expected to grow by 23% by 2050. So that's 23% more of everything associated with an individual: a car, a truck, a plane, airports, parking lots, waste, where that's going to be disposed. So anything associated with an individual is going to go up by that percentage. So that means we need more farmland to feed people. Whenever we need more farmland, what does that say about wilderness and wildlife? How are we going to make that change? How are we going to feed people while keeping environments and biodiversity sustainable and healthy? And so there's a lot of opportunity as we figure out how to farm, how to build, and how to transport in more environmentally and sustainable ways. And if we look at kind of the development of environmental policy in the U.S., we have this public policy, where the government branches are guided by how they manage the public affairs. And so the different government branches are the legislative, executive, and judiciary branch. So legislative is basically Congress, where they're passing legislation, right? And they're shaping policy. The executive branch is the public, or not the public, but the president. So this is where that enforcement of the law and the policy that has been made by Congress happens. And then the judiciary system, or the court system, interprets that law and applies it to each individual situation. And so you have, for example, a passage of a law, which is by the legislative branch, where you have this original idea, it's turned into a bill, you have somebody to sponsor it, the bill gets introduced, then it's referred to a committee, then a subcommittee, then it goes on hearings, and then it's written up. Then it's sent to a full committee. If that fails, so if the bill fails, then it basically goes back to the subcommittee and can be reworked. But if it passes, it will go to a full committee markup. Then it will go to a debate, or scheduled for a floor debate, then to the debate. If it's rejected, it basically can go back through, be recycled. If it's passed, it's may have some changes made, then it goes to the House and the Senate for confirmation, and it gets the full markup, can be vetoed, sent back to the House. If it veto overrides, then it can be full committee, or if it passes through with no problems, it goes back to the full committee, and then it becomes law. So you have this kind of brief passage system of the legislative process that's really interesting in terms of how we get something into law. And so this basically happens when you have, say, Congress considering something to be against the good of public policy and public good. And so then they'll pass legislation related to that. And whenever that law or legislation has been passed, then it's up to the executive branch to basically enforce that law. So this is kind of the branch dealing with the president. So you have the president, then you have the Office of Management and Budget, you have the White House office, and then you have kind of some subdivisions under that. So for example, the EPA, the Department of Interior, the Department of Justice, the Department of Health, the Department of Energy, etc. And they all have their own different sectors that they're involved with in terms of enforcing that law. So for example, the Department of Interior is looking at endangered species, energy, national parks. The Department of Justice is environmental litigation. The Department of Defense is, say, pollution control and civil works construction. And so they have their own, all have their own roles in terms of making sure that the legislative portion is enforced. And so again, they put that in force. During the 1970s, there were a lot of important environmental legislation that was put into action. And one of those, or I should say, with the Obama administration, we had a lot of environmental policy coming out, but then some of that policy was then brought back or reduced, loosened, as it says here, by the previous administration. And so that has kind of a big effect on basically how these sectors can enforce those laws based off of, what's added, changed, ratified, etc. The big issue for the U.S. environmental policy is to, or it has a challenge to build, maintain, and renew public support for environmental governance. And so we had a vision, right? We have Earth Day set in 1970, common idea of a vision for environmental good. We also have environmental movement rallies against corporate polluters or despoilers. And so they try to bring that positive vision about through that act of say, of rallies and protests. Lobbying is basically where you try to alter legislation on political issues. There are approximately 3,500 organizations that have Washington, D.C. offices where they can lobby to make changes to specific political issues. Groups that tend to lobby on environmental issues are, in industries and trade associations, nonprofit, public interest, and then scientific and research organizations. So they kind of have a big role in lobbying as well. Whenever we look at the significance of administrative law, our environmental law is governed by that administrative law. So it's super significant, right? So this basically says how government organizations can develop and implement regulatory programs. And so it's, for example, affects things like state programs. In 1969, you have NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, which was developed to institutionalize a concern for the quality of the environment within the federal government. So basically, what they wanted to do was advise the president on the state of the environment, okay? And then they had this advisory council that basically outlines compliance guidelines. So they're basically saying, okay, this is our issue with environmental quality, and this is the state of the environment in the United States. And then now you need to go over the compliance guidelines and kind of see where we need to take action. With the EPA, a lot of the federal agencies acted within their delegated authority without considering environmental impacts. And this was until about 1970. And then in 1970, the EPA was developed and they brought about that environmental regulation. So now we're starting to look at environmental impacts. And so they are responsible for enforcing actions that are harmful to the environment and public health. And so the way the EPA will work is they can issue a warning letter, they can provide administrative order, they can do a permit action, civil enforcement, or criminal proceedings, depending on kind of where they're at in terms of the effect that that institution is having on the environment. And we mentioned this in the last chapter, this command and control philosophy. And so currently, a lot of the environmental law really has the perception that the problems are localized when they're really not. They really are cross-border, cross-space, cross-time problems. So they're in the air, they're in the water, they're in the soil, and that doesn't follow our boundaries, right? We've talked about this before. And so environmental regulation has a focus on specific phenomena and has this command and control solutions, right? Where we have this specific legislation and regulation that are used to achieve the ends that we're trying to get with this specific environmental policy. Where we look at, so if we look at certain issues, right? So let's think about the decline of salmon or wildfire on public land. There's a lot of qualities to these two issues. There's complexity. So there's a lot of interconnectedness with these two issues. There's trade-offs, etc., right? There's also a polarization with this, meaning that there's competing values. So some people will have values on continuing fishing and harvesting the salmon, while others will have values for reducing the harvest so that we can protect that species. And so depending on the policy choice, there's going to be winners and losers on both sides. Some will benefit, some will be harmed, and then some we have no idea what the outcome is going to be. And then there's also delayed consequences. So even though you provide a outcome, a solution for a specific problem, right? You say, okay, this is what's going to happen. That fix may not happen immediately, and there may be delayed consequences. So you may not even see what some of those consequences are going to be for decades. And so it's this complicated, interconnected system that is really difficult to play around, especially when you're developing policy over a lot of these environmental situations. And then we also have this national versus regional conflict. So this national, or we could also say international priorities, will differ from local and regional priorities. So what is a priority of a city versus a state could be very different based off of their local resources versus the state's resources, and how they utilize and kind of affect those. And so science has sometimes put in this difficult place where it's sometimes not important in evaluating the policy options, but science can sometimes end up serving inappropriately as a surrogate for debates over values and preferences. So basically meaning that people can take data and contort it to align with their values and using that science in inappropriate situations. And so a lot of the times when we look at, debates over values and ethics and preferences. That's really not a role for science. The data is going to show you what's going to happen to an ecosystem if you continue X, Y, Z, what consequences could happen, how ecosystem health may change, but it's not really there to determine, okay, these are the values, this is the ethics behind it because of this data or whatever. So science has a pretty ambiguous role in these situations. Looking at the greening of geopolitics, what we're referring to here is basically environmental politics, or what we would say, quote unquote, green politics. And these issues have really moved into mainstream arenas, meaning that they've been brought to the forefront of a lot of these political conversations. And it's because we're seeing an increase in urgency, a sense of urgency about the environment. And so we're seeing these issues kind of brought to the forefront. And, now we see that any type of environmental degradation that you have in kind of any region, nation, country is going to affect the quality of life of others in those countries or those populations. And so a lot of this green policy is now being pushed because of the public health, right? We want good areas to live with good resources that we can have access to. And that deals with that environmental and green policy. And so it's now being pushed. If we look at if we look at the problems in terms of international environmental problems, there's things like energy consumption having a major impact on world energy prices, and the greenhouse gas effect. China is one of the big countries that consume a lot of energy. China's energy consumption has increased about 68% between 2005 and 2015. And then in 2015, China consumed about 23% of the world's energy and is still the largest energy consumer in the world. 2015, coal was 66% of China's primary energy production source, meaning that they're releasing a lot of carbon dioxide. One of the biggest concerns on this consumption is the carbon emissions from those coal-fired power plants. And they're just expected to increase. But China has said that they want to stabilize their emissions by 2030. And so we'll have to see what those emissions will look like in the coming future. And so here's just some energy and oil consumption data for China. And they're not the only one in this problem. So we have data for China here, but it's a lot of the other developed countries in the world are using considerable amount of energy. The U.S. is one. A lot of developing countries have issues with environmental action because they're basically looking at a chance to improve their bargaining leverage with foreign aid donors. And so before, poor nations never had a strategic advantage, but now they have this ecological edge because we're seeing that we need to conserve resources in these poorer countries, but that those resources are really all they have access to. And so they're saying, okay, if you don't help us, then we're going to have to use these resources. And so now they're trying to get foreign aid through that way. And so, there's a lot of issues that come from that. We also have national security issues. So NATO, so North Atlantic Treaty Organization, developed an Office of Scientific and Environmental Affairs. You have the U.S. Department of Defense, that is Office of Environmental Security. And so there are a lot of obstacles with the world's most advanced nations that are basically entwined with economic and political interests. So they're interrelated They're entwined together. So you think about drought. Drought can start a very big political conflict, especially if there's a water source that's on the border. That could lead to very big issues. Um, the most global organizations haven't been able to achieve success in reversing their role on harming environments. Some fail because they, have competing interests. Others just can't fix it on their own. They need other nations or groups to kind of jump in and aid in that, especially if it's a large ecosystem that's cross-boundary, or a large resource that's cross-boundary. There's been 160 environmental treaties since the start of the 20th century, 500 bilateral agreements dealing with cross-border, so international environmental issues. Some of those are the Montreal Protocol, which we've talked about, the Antarctic Treaty, and then the Transboundary Air Pollution Act that was put into place. We talked about the Montreal Protocol being used to phase out the production of CFCs, and that allowed the ozone layer to start to build back and recover. And it started to thicken back up because of the reduction of the CFCs. With the achievements that we've obtained internationally, 3 are pretty big achievements that should be brought to attention. So first is the global agreement on the natureness and seriousness of the threat. So that's kind of the big thing you want to first start out with. You want to have a cooperative approach, especially between developed and developing countries, so those poorer countries and developed countries. And then you want your policy to be based on impartial, unbiased expert advice, who know those fields in and out, and basically, go off the data, and use that science in an impartial way. So there is so issues that come about, though, is that there's no international legislator to pass laws. There are no international agencies to regulate the like global laws, right? Each country kind of has their own thing. And so there are environmental organizations that are trying to go networks, to grow networks, to be interconnected globally, to have a greater sense of working together and to try to help this international environmental issue. So for example, you have the Earth Summit on Environment and Development. So in 1992, you had 178 countries meet in Rio de Janeiro, and it was the largest gathering of world leaders ever held. They looked at major issues like developed countries in the north grown accustomed to lifestyles that are just consuming disproportionate amounts of energy, generating a bulk of pollution. And then many of the developing countries in the south are consuming irreplaceable resources to provide for their increasing populations. And so it was really kind of meant to bring together and interconnect the nation's environmental goals, and to try to develop some sort of idea of potential solutions for that. The environmental policy in the European Union is pretty interesting. The EU had this slogan, "The environment knows no frontiers," during the 70s. But and that was when the EU was drafting its first kind of environmental legislation. Early laws focused on pollution control, testing, and labeling any kind of toxic or waste or harmful substances. And then a lot of the laws were pushed at trying to improve living and working conditions of people in the EU. Then we have the treaty from 92 that established sustainable development into law for the EU. And then the Amsterdam Treaty of 97 made sustainable development one of the overriding objectives. So the EU has really been like at the forefront of trying to push this sustainable development, renewable energy, wind energy, global thermal, geothermal energy, etc., and trying to look at that conversion from non-renewable fossil fuels to renewable resources. But through the development of these environmental agreements, we have learned that the scientific community has a big role in this, and we can show links of human activities with environmental problems, show that they're related, and learn and um, educate the public on how they are related, showing what could happen to human health and global environment if we don't take action, and compare that with what could be if we did lessen our impact on the environment. Some other ways we can try to get at these environmental ideas and bring them to light is to use incentives, not kind of direct, I won't say direct actions, but not punitive actions. Yeah. And then every interested party needs to have an opportunity to participate. They need to be involved. They need to be heard. They need to be a part of the discussion. Government action needs to be there. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be predictable. We don't need to guess when they are going to come and when they're not going to come, when they're going to get involved, when they're not going to get involved. They need to have government-led incentives. They need to have subsidies. Needs to be flexible, and market-based solutions when there's an appropriate situation. And agreements are the beginning of a process, not the end. You have to continue that work and continue after the agreements have been made. One example of good policy is green consumerism. So basically you can have eco labels to help consumers choose products that are environmentally friendly. And so you can choose what to buy and what to consume based off of how much energy it's using and its effect on the environment. And so one of the big ones for, I know, the US is the Energy Star appliances. And so you can compare kind of how much energy one appliance is using compared to another one. And decide which washer you want to use, or which refrigerator is going to save the most energy and be more environmentally friendly, etc. And so you have lots of different eco labels kind of related to that. And then ultimately, in the end, it all comes back to you. It all comes back to each individual. There are no policies, no incentives, or any information that can substitute for our individual responsibility. Ultimately, it's our choice to make the goods, to buy the goods, to distribute the goods, whether or not we want to run a business that does not get rid of waste appropriately, or it does, whether or not we want to cut corners to get more profit, whether or not we want to turn off our light, while we're still in the room and conserve energy, or whether or not you want to buy locally, or anything that can help the environmental situation, right? So each individual can have that impact, and you've all learned that throughout this course, and especially from your discussion on your ecological footprint. Each one of us has done that exercise and knows where our lifestyle puts us in terms of being environmentally friendly. And what I can say is that none of us are living sustainably, because each one of us, including me, I'm just as guilty as as everybody else, does not live to where we can survive on one earth, right? All of us had a footprint that was larger than one Earth. Some of us were pretty good, actually, like 2.4 or 2.6 is what I've seen for some. And I actually think the US average is like 5. Um, so that's you're living a lot better than most, and kudos to you in terms of energy and environmental impacts. But the big thing is just realize that it comes back to you as an individual, and don't sit there and say, my changes don't matter. Because if everybody says that, then nothing gets changed. It only takes, your neighbor to see you making a change, and then that neighbor will be seen by another neighbor, and then, it can catch on. And all of a sudden you have a big change that maybe you started. So just kind of think about that as you're living your life. And if you take away anything from this course, hopefully you take away, information that can lead you to be a more environmentally friendly citizen, in terms of whether or not you vote for specific people, or you are involved in, say, local committees or communities actions, or whether or not you just change a couple of things about your lifestyle. Every little thing matters. And so with that, there's our summary page for this chapter. And so this is our last chapter for the course. And I just want to say I always enjoy teaching this course. I hope you learned a lot from this. I hope I kind of changed your views on how you look at the environment, maybe if you already hadn't looked at the environment kind of in this way, and how everything's interconnected. And I always love that saying is you just can't do one thing. You pull on one string, you're going to affect a lot of others. Think about a spider web, how we're all those strands are interconnected. And yeah, so I just wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Um, Let me know if you have any questions or any concerns coming up towards the end of the class. I'll send out an announcement when all of the grades are posted and give you about 24 hours to send me any concerns for those before I submit them for final grades. And yeah, it was very nice meeting you all, and your discussions. And I hope you have a good rest of your lives. And I wish you all the best, and stay safe. And maybe we'll see you later or talk to you later. Have a good one.